video, I'm going to look at some more skills that you can acquire in relation to doing a literature review, especially for your dissertation. Of course, it's really important for you to decide which sources are going to be most relevant, because what you don't want, say for example, if you did a Google Scholar search only, which of course you're not going to do, but supposing a person did do that, they could end up with an overwhelming number. So how do you start limiting those down? How do you make sure that the ones you're going for are going to be most relevant? And of course, there are lots of little skills that you can do to be able to capture exactly what you're looking for rather than be overwhelmed by too much. And the first one is going to be make sure you use the most appropriate keywords. As I'll mention in another video, those keywords are probably coming from your research question, the theme of your dissertation. And if you've already read some work that's similar to what you're hoping to explore, then you might be using the keywords that those journals or those studies have actually mentioned as well. Then you'll draw up your inclusion and exclusion list. Again, that's on another video for you. And you only want to include that material that you've clearly got on your inclusion list. But it's important to say why you're including some and excluding others. Once you've actually come down with a specific number, you obviously want to reduce that more and more as well to get down to the core essence of the papers, specifically on the search that you've enacted. So it's impossible for me to turn around and say how many articles you should be using or how many resources. Because that's an artificial way of doing it. If you follow your inclusion exclusion criteria and follow your search strategy perfectly, you will end up with the number that you're meant to end up with. And that needs to be manageable for your particular type of study. So maybe that depends on the word count for the dissertation that you're doing. What's going to be manageable? If you've got too much, then chances are the work could end up as being too descriptive. And certainly at level 7 and level 8 with doctoral studies, what you're looking at there is making sure that your work is more analytical and less descriptive. So you don't want too many studies included. On the other hand, you don't want too few, because then you're not going to be able to do certain elements around critiquing them, such as, for example, choosing the types of studies that you're going for, the key messages that you're finding in these, whether this is to do with trends, especially in quantitative research, or themes within qualitative research. So you need enough to be able to do a thorough critique of. But once you've actually reduced the number, so looking at your inclusion exclusion criteria, you can reduce the number down to a certain figure. It's really good to document this in a chart. Maybe you're going to use a Prisma chart or something similar. And with that, you just show the number. So you started off with a high number, you reduced it because X number weren't in the right language or outside of your time frame, and you actually show coming down in the chart what you're going to do. But then you explain that to your reader underneath the chart. So explain to them why you're excluding some to get down to the number that you're actually ending up with. Then when you get to a certain number, and again, I don't like to talk numbers here, but supposing, and I'm making this up, supposing you got to a number in the 30s, you might think, okay, I'm getting a bit more manageable here. So at that stage, what you can do then is read through the title of every paper that you found and read the abstract. Look at the keywords as well and ask yourself, is this really central to what I'm looking for? Because at that stage, you may even get rid of some more. So supposing you did end up with 30 or 40, then when you apply that critique to it, going through the titles, the abstracts and keywords, you might get rid of even more. So you're bringing that number down to a smaller number. And once you actually do that and you've rejected some more, that's when you decide that you're going to apply whatever appraisal tool you're going to use to critique the work. So, say for example, with some studies, it's important that you have a matrix as an appendix at the back of your work, and on that matrix you might have columns such as the author's names, the title of the paper, the number of participants, the type of study. You might even have columns then looking at the strengths and the weaknesses of this. So the very fact that you're reading these whole articles and trying to extrapolate out of them certain aspects, so such as the strengths, such as the weaknesses, the type of study, the number of participants, then already you're starting to critique and you're getting a feel for the work that you're looking at. If you're using a matrix table, then it means you're reading your articles, looking through that lens. You're looking at the work through the lens of the criteria you've got on your matrix table. But then you might additionally be using something else. So say, for example, the CASP tools, the Critical Appraisal Skills Program. So if you just Google CASP tools, you'll find those various tools. And there are other organizations that do tools as well for specific types of studies. So especially more qualitative work, for example, you may use other critiquing tools. So whichever tool it is that you're using, and again, you can put one of these in as an example in the appendix, especially if you're going to type on it or handwrite it, put that in as an example just to show to the reader how you've used that specific tool. But when you use those, so supposing you're using the CASP tools, they might be asking you 10 questions. So you've already read the paper once, thinking of your matrix. So how many participants were in this? What type of study? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? You've started that sort of critique. And then when you apply the CASP tools to this, the CASP tools might actually ask you particular questions. Did the study mention ethics? Are the aims and outcomes clearly elaborated? And if you start saying no to some of these questions, what tools like CASP tools then tell you to do is to exclude them. So in your text of the dissertation or your literature review, you need to spell that out. You might say, well, I ended up with 30 plus at one stage. So then I read through the titles, the abstracts, and the keywords, and I managed to exclude another 10 because, and tell your reader why, tell them why you've decided to exclude them, and then say, then I ended up with, say, for example, 20, and at that point I applied the relevant CASP tool to these. After critiquing the work using the CASP tool, I managed to exclude maybe another 5, for example, but tell the reader why, because you must make this as transparent as possible. So every time you decide to exclude some work, tell the reader why. You don't have to do this individually for every single paper, but you might say, well, I excluded 5 because they were outside my time frame. Once I applied the CASP tool, 6 didn't mention the outcomes of the studies, so I excluded those because the CASP tool said so. But you don't want to end up with too few. So if you're being really rigorous, say, for example, if you are using the CASP tools, and if you're being really rigorous, and by using those, you exclude X number, and by excluding that number, you've ended up with too few for your particular study. So then you might say, well, actually, by using the relevant CASP tools, I lost so many papers, I ended up with too few. So I've decided to include, say, 4, which only failed the CASP tools on a couple of criteria, such as no detail about ethics and no detail about the outcomes. So already you're showing your level of critique in understanding the quality of the papers. So if papers aren't mentioning ethics, or they're not clearly outlining their outcomes and showing how they've achieved those, you are already showing a good level of critique in understanding that. Once you've done that, you should get down to your final countdown, okay, the number of papers that you're actually going to work on for your critical analysis. Again, it's all according to what type of review you're doing. So I keep encouraging you all to read Grant and Booth of 2009 and any good textbook on different types of literature reviews and see the way in which you're meant to do this. Okay, so it's not just going to be a critique of, say, for example, if you're looking at qualitative research, then you may be trying to identify particular themes. So you might be doing a thematic analysis. And Brown and Clark are key names with thematic analysis. So it's going to be a case of you having to use Brown and Clark references as well. Okay, really important there. But this brings you to your final countdown, and this is how you critique your work. And then just get on with it. Okay, so hopefully you're going to have the chance to write your review, follow the guidelines that you're meant to be doing, and make sure you look at the rubrics, the grading criteria, to see how you can do it as best as possible. Okay, I wish you good luck with all of this and hope it comes out really well.